It's already legal in Alaska, Colorado, Oregon, Washington State, and D.C. Now the push to legalize recreational marijuana in Massachusetts is growing stronger. In fact, two groups are seeking to put the issue before voters in 2016. One organization called State Repeal filed 3 separate petitions to get a question on the ballot, all of which would legalize the possession, cultivation, and use of marijuana by anyone 21 years or older. No new taxation, no additional bureaucracy. Another group is called Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol, is proposing to do just that, meaning it would be legal for anyone 21 or older to possess a certain amount of marijuana and even grow it at home. It would also create a system of licensed, regulated retail outlets and cultivation, manufacturing, and testing facilities, and tax it at a rate as much as 12%. Joining me now is the campaign manager of that group, Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol, Will Luzier. He's also a former Assistant Attorney General, former Executive Director of the Mass Interagency Council on Substance Abuse and Prevention. Will, good to see you. Heidi Heilman is President and co-founder of the Massachusetts Prevention Alliance and is opposed to any kind of marijuana legalization. Hi, Heidi. And Kevin Hill is the Director of the Substance Abuse Consultation Service at McLean Hospital. He also teaches psychiatry at Harvard. He's the author of the book, Marijuana, the Unbiased Truth, about the world's most popular weed. Dr. Hill, it's good to see you, all 3 of you. So Colorado comes to Massachusetts. Is there anything I left out that's important? Not the little details. Anything I left out in the opening here, Will?
No, I think what we want to do is offer Massachusetts voters the opportunity to replace marijuana prohibition with regulated Massachusetts companies that will create jobs, will pay taxes, will reduce youth access, and take the commerce away from gangs and cartels.
What's about, in 2008, the voters overwhelmingly said decriminalize possession of a small amount of marijuana. Why isn't that enough right now? And just wait to see what happens in Colorado and all these other states to see if it's as positive as you seem to think it will be.
Because there are still people who are being sanctioned for marijuana possession. Over an ounce, folks who are parolees or probationers who test positive for those drugs, they're still being sanctioned. And we don't think it's appropriate for anybody to go to jail for possession or using marijuana.
Heidi, what's the problem with this? I mean, people are using it anyway. Kids have access to it anyway. Why not get the state involved, regulate it, make it safer, tax it, and use that money for good things?
Well, what we're seeing in Colorado is that all indications show that youth access is rising dramatically, where we have 8th graders using 350% above the national average. We have the schools in the communities in Colorado with marijuana flowing through them at levels never seen before. So as far as youth access goes, that's just not the case.
Is that your major concern, kids access on the part of kids?
Yeah, and my concern is moving a niche market of users to mass consumer base. I mean, we're looking at, if you look at alcohol, and they seem to wrap, the marijuana movement wraps its argument around the incarceration rates. But if you look at alcohol, alcohol puts more people in jails today than marijuana and tobacco combined. I mean, it's just, when you have people under the influence of drugs, they're impaired. And so that's what we're looking at.
Should we make alcohol consumption illegal too?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say we do better work with what we have with these legal industries that are already addiction marketing industries.
Dr. Elliott, my understanding is you split the difference. You support legalization, but not that legalization. Is that right?
That's right.
What's the problem with the bill?
I think the taxes are way too low.
12% max?
12% is way too low. In the 4 states in the district that have taxed legalized recreational marijuana, the tax rates range, the effective tax rates from 20 to 44%. So 12%, and then 0% excise tax, the 6% sales tax from the other group are way too low.
Doesn't the high taxation leave a huge opening for the black market where at a far lower rate?
Absolutely not. So in the states that have done this, we've dramatically decreased the black market. The action that decreases the black market is by making the illegal product legal, not the tax rate.
I disagree with that, because if you look at tobacco, black market tobacco sales that's the #1 traded product on the black market. If you look at New York State has more illegal cigarette sales than they do legal cigarette sales, and that's because the taxes make it too high, and so the people are buying these products on the street.
So what are those tax rates, though? Those tax rates are closer to the tax rates that they're proposing. If you tax it between 20 and 44%, you will decrease the likelihood that young people will buy it.
Attorney General Maura Healey says that the Attorney General in Colorado has told her that there's still a 40% black market in Colorado, and the reason that
opposes the whole thing.
The reason that is because the taxes are too high, and Colorado is in the process of reducing those taxes in order to eliminate the illicit market.
But we should be clear, she doesn't even support it at the lower rate, correct?
No, she doesn't support it at
speaking
all.
of that, by the way, you're on the Democratic State Committee, is that right?
Yes, I am.
Okay, virtually no Democrats except Stan Rosenberg are even open, it seems, to this idea. The Attorney General is opposed to it, the Governor is opposed to it, the Speaker of the House is opposed to it. If it's such a good idea, why is virtually none of the top political infrastructure of the state on your side?
Well, Jim, I think the voters are on our side. 2014 poll said that 65% of the Democrats supported marijuana legalization, and
it's about 35% of the voters, though. You know, there are more unenrolled voters.
I understand that there were probably a little less than 50% of the unenrolled voters that supported it.
But when you look at Colorado, after the first year of legalization, the polls dropped 17%, so that people thought. They thought they were going to get something different, and what happened was they have advertising that's directly marketing to youth. They have products that are youth products that are pops and soda and ice cream and candies and gummy bears, and they're high THC products.
We can do that better.
What do you mean we can do that better?
Well, why can't we look at the states that have done it and say they've done these things well, these things not so well, and do it better here? I'd like to believe that we could have the best possible policy, but I do believe that if we implement these tax rates, we're going to have the worst policy.
So what are you saying? So you're for the concept, against the details.
That's
Does that
right.
mean you're going to vote no on this thing?
I'd like to believe that I wouldn't have to, but I'd like the politicians to get off the sidelines and get involved.
Well, they're not about to do that. So what's wrong with his question passing, according to you? When it's passed, go lobby the legislature to, quote, fix it.
That may be the best that I can do at this point.
You know, one thing, back to you, Heidi, for a second. In 2008, I remember it like it was yesterday, the whole law enforcement community, the political infrastructure, sort of like now, against it. 2-1, the voters said yes. That was a decriminalization. Medical marijuana, not much better. 2-1.
Right.
Realistically speaking, this is probably going to happen again. Isn't it far better to go to the legislature or go to the drafters and say, I'm not crazy about this, but I want to have some protections built in so that if it does pass, we're in a good place, as opposed to just saying no, and then you have something you can't stand.
The industry wants us to believe that this is inevitable, but when people find out what the consequences of this drug are, and some of the consequences from Colorado, we're not going to know for years. We're not going to know the long-term impact, and you can speak to that more than anybody.
By the way, don't you agree? I mean, even though Will said we know enough, isn't it far better to sit tight for a little while till we do find out more from Colorado and Washington and all these other places?
I wouldn't feel badly about that, but I think you can't ignore the polls. And so I think we're in a position where we should give the people what they want while limiting risk. And I think you're right. I think the question of the politicians is not whether or not they're in favor, but the question is, if this gets passed, what should it look like?
But you're talking about giant industry. You're talking again about giant industry. We have giant industry of sugar, big farm, tobacco, alcohol, and all four of those industries are having trouble regulating. They call it regulation, but it's not regulated. They write the laws. Tobacco spends $20 million a year on lobbying in the U.S. alone.
None of those.
You got to hold there. You have the last 20 seconds to respond to what Heidi just said.
None of those organizations, those big corporations, if you will, are interested in coming here to Massachusetts. And the legislature will get the opportunity when we get the signatures on our petition. It goes to the legislature. They can look at it.
That's not true. They can't change it. They can't change it.
They can either pass it or not pass it.
Well, the other thing you just said.
I mean, they can change it after it passes into law, should it pass into law, but not during that review process.
Look, tobacco has kept their eyes on marijuana for years, for decades. They have all the settlement of 2000, the Tobacco Settlement Act. We got all the paperwork and all the internal documentation, and they indicate that marijuana is an alternative product line. It's an alternative for tobacco product line. So they have the land to grow it, the machines to roll it, and the way to mass produce it and to distribute it. And don't you tell me that they're not waiting for this to move by state and then coming in and acquiring the marijuana.
Well, he's not going to tell you because he doesn't have any time, but maybe next time he will. Will, pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Nice to see you. Heidi, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Dr. Kevin Hill, he is not going away for the first time ever. We're going to ask him to stick around for the next segment as well. But what about heroin? Believe it or not, decriminalizing the use and possession of heroin was recently proposed by one Massachusetts elected official to help fight opiate addiction. The man behind that idea is Robert Jubinville. He's a criminal defense lawyer from Milton who also sits on the Governor's Council, which is the thing that screens judicial nominees. And good to see you, Bob, by the way. See you. Once again, Kevin Hill, he's still director of the Substance Abuse Consultation Service at McLean Hospital. Gentlemen, thank you. What are you proposing and why, Bob Jubinville?
Well, I'm proposing some dialogue about it, Jim. You know, we have for 45 years now had the war on drugs, and I think by all accounts it's been a failure.
So what would you be doing?
Well, to me, discussing decriminalizing it, rather than having these young people and some older people hauled into our courts because they have a medical condition and end up with records that will stay with them for the rest of their lives.
Anybody support this other than you?
I don't know. You know, elected officials are a little tough to jump into waters.
Well, let's talk to a doctor who's here. What's wrong with this? You just told us you're for legalization of marijuana, but you appear to be against this, yes?
Well, I think in concept, I agree that we should be trying to get more people into treatment. So heroin's a killer, and what we've been doing isn't working. So I think outside the box thinking is what we need. I think my key question would be, are the drug courts in Massachusetts not getting it done? We have 22 drug courts, and if that's not sufficing, then I think something more radical.
Well, let me stay with you for a minute. You know, the guy who seems to be doing a variation on what you're talking about is the police chief in Gloucester. I mean, Republicans, Democrats, everybody's celebrating this guy. It says, you bring in your drugs, you bring in your equipment, your needles, whatever, surrender them. We will not only not prosecute you, we'll give you a, quote, angel to work with you. His view being that public health rather than public safety, criminal prosecution is the way to go. Why is that wildly popular and nobody wants to touch what he's doing?
Well, I think people don't know about Bob's idea. I mean, I think it's a good...
But do you support what's going on in Gloucester?
I think it's a good idea. I wonder
So if Gloucester's okay, what's wrong with this?
Well, I think the question becomes, if you don't follow through with treatment, should there be some ramifications there? And I think if in Gloucester, and perhaps with Bob's plan, if you're not entered into the penal system, there may not be the bite at the end if you don't do what you're supposed to do.
Am I right that this is essentially a variation on the Gloucester thing?
No,
no. Why not?
Because, in my opinion anyway, and I applaud the chief for thinking out of the box, but I doubt, Jim, whether too many heroin addicts are bringing in heroin to the chief.
Well, if they don't, then they aren't able to make use of the program.
It's going into their system if they haven't, I would think, if they're in the throes of addiction. But it's a good thought. My point is this. We are conveyor belting people through our court system over and over and over again. We have judges who don't know about addictions, and 80% of their work is with addictions. We have probation officers that don't know about addictions.
But isn't that where the problem is, Bob Jubinville? It seems to me that there's a step or 2 or 10 before legalization of heroin. All the things you mentioned about training, competence, all these sort of things. Maybe some sort of presence in the courtroom that hopefully causes people to get some sort of treatment. Isn't that
I disagree, and I disagree at this reason. The court systems are designed to punish. This is a medical condition. This is what everybody tells me, and I believe it, and I agree with it. I say, what other medical condition do we handle in our court system?
Well, that's a great question. What other medical condition do we handle in our court system?
I agree with that point. I think my question is that, you know, the drug courts are designed to divert people from the jails to treatment, and if they're not functioning as they should, then I think we need to take a step.
Do we have enough treatment? Even let's assume we could strike a deal here, the three of us. Is there enough money in the system to provide treatment for all who either want it or who are directed to it, Bob?
Well, I think there would be, Jim, because first of all, think of the tremendous savings you'd have in enforcement, prosecution, and incarceration. It is a tremendous bill we're paying every year for that, and we're getting practically nothing, in my opinion, out of it. So we would have all of that savings to go in to places like McLean for doing what they do best.
Can I read your mind, and you'll disabuse me of this? It seems to me the goal is not really heroin decriminalization. The goal is to provoke a discussion so something better than this rotten system is done. Is that not a fair statement?
That's a fair statement.
Okay, and so what do? You become the czar of this thing. How do you achieve most of his goals, which I assume you share? Different route, Dr. Hill.
I think a well-oiled drug court machine should do most of what Bob is talking about. I think that he, due to his experiences, has become jaded when thinking about the drug courts, but I think the idea is the same, to get people who have a chronic medical illness into treatment that they need rather than having them rot in the jails.
And is that doable or not?
Well, the drug court's fine. But I ask judges, okay, at the end of this, after somebody's gone through 18 months of jumping through the hoops, do you dismiss the charges? Oh, no. So they walk out with a guilty on their Corey. Very hard to get a job.
How about that? I mean, isn't that a problem?
Well, I think the data from drug courts suggests that 75% of those people don't end up getting arrested again within the next 2 years or so. So I think that there is a lot of good done with the drug courts. They also save money, as we talked about earlier.
But a clean record's a pretty important thing, as Bob Jubinville says, isn't it?
It is. It is.
I mean, isn't the ultimate goal, even if you haven't figured out the way to get there yet, is to avoid the criminal justice system and do it as a public health matter? The problem is people just can't figure out exactly how to get from here to there. You're both nodding in agreement.
Yeah.
On that note, Bob Jubinville, nice to see you.
Thank
Keep
you for your
proving
time
those
on this
judges.
issue.
Pleasure, nice to see you.
Thanks for having
Dr.
me.
Hill, it's a pleasure, as always.